LiSTNR production.
A warning. This episode contains references to suicide and to men's violence against women. Help is always available. Dial 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732 or call Lifeline on 13 11 14. Just before midnight on the 6th of December 1994, Elisabeth Membrey arrived home from her shift at the Manhattan Hotel in Melbourne. Police estimated that by 3 a.m. she was dead, concluding that she'd been murdered in her hallway. 16 years later, former Detective Tim Peck was able to finally make an arrest. But as the case went to court, it soon turned from a successful investigation to Tim tragically spiralling into a dark and near fatal place. I'm former police officer Brent Sanders, and for the past 25 years, I've dedicated myself to sharing what I've learnt on the force to the Australian public so they can better protect themselves from falling victim to crime. So with the help of some of the most respected current and former detectives and high-ranking law enforcement agents, we're going to pull back the curtain on what life is like on the force and what they've learned about how crime and criminals really work. These are real stories from real detectives.
One of the things I come across just recently was a photograph of me standing at the front of the Melbourne Magistrates Court with the parents of a deceased person, Elisabeth Membrey, Roger and Joy. Roger passed away earlier this year, and I'm sure Joy wouldn't mind me mentioning this case on the podcast. Also in the picture is my great friend and mentor, Ron Iddles, who was an esteemed homicide investigator himself. 1994, 6th of December, Liz went to work in Ringwood at a nightclub or a pub, and we know she got home and she was removed from that house, a bloodied scene in her car, the car taken away, car returned, and the body's never been found. It was investigated obviously thoroughly back then. There was a number of suspects, but it all dried up and it was pretty much in the cold case basket. I think it was about 2006 or 2007. Ron gave me the investigation to review to see if we could find any suspects, and I located a suspect who I believed had been involved. We did many, many hours' work, and it became a bit of I won't say an obsession, but it was certainly the biggest case I was working on it for much of that time amongst some other cases. And we worked away at it for a number of years, and it was March 2011 when that photo was taken at the front of the Melbourne Magistrates Court, and a suspect had just been committed to stand trial for her murder. And I looked at that photo recently and thought, well, that's a picture of me, at the pinnacle. That's it. It's a big case. We've charged someone. What a great outcome that is. But as I looked at the photo more deeply, even by 2011, I was struggling with alcohol significantly. My life wasn't what I wanted it to be. The mask was fully on, and it just made me reflect on that, what is when do you win, or what is the measure we look at as a detective as a success? And unfortunately for me back then, the only success I was driven by was that success at court. Now, ultimately, we went to trial 18 months later and we lost the trial, and the suspect was found not guilty. So there weren't any real winners out of that. Joy and Roger certainly didn't get to find the location of their missing daughter. Both Ron and I would openly say, were impacted by that investigation. There was 130 witnesses, a 6-week trial, a really complex investigation. An innocent person, as it turned out, had been charged and remanded in custody for an extended period of time and then released when he was acquitted. So if that was me winning, I'm not sure where the win part of it was. And I think being involved in trials like that, you learn as you go along. I wasn't a homicide for a long time. I wasn't a 25-year sort of Ron Iddles sort of character. But you do learn about juries and court processes and so on. And there is a lot of pressure. And for me, my way of dealing with that anxiety and that pressure was to use alcohol. And it just sort of really brought home for me that whilst it was a great job and that was the results I was craving, it was more about my ego and reputation than about me as a person. I wished I had been able to go back in time to that photo and remember what my reactions with Joy and Roger were like, for example, to really understand what impact we'd had with them and what meaning that our wanting to solve that case had meant to them. But we really didn't have those conversations. I was too busy worrying about running off and getting the next pat on the back than really, contributing to that. I shared almost none of that investigation with my family because I thought it was best to keep that away from them. I didn't want to put them through basically what I was going through. But my life was dictated at that time by the ebbs and flows of that investigation. As to if it was going well, I was up. If it was going poorly, I was down. And I think the real measure, if we think about winning and so on, for me it would have been more around how I could be as a person at that time. If I could have been more aligned to my values and who I wanted to be. And there's plenty of great detectives who have managed to straddle both aspects of life, like manage their personal life and their work life. And unfortunately for me, that's one of my regrets that I wasn't able to do that. And I don't think I provided, any great outcomes because of that limitation and that the way my mental health was going and not putting my hand up and saying that I needed some treatment or, even acknowledging to myself that I wasn't tracking so well. Certainly, I would have liked to have thought that if I was in a better state of mind, maybe we could have, done a better investigation. I don't know. It's hard to speculate looking back, but the photograph just really brought into sharp focus that winning wasn't about court, and it shouldn't have ever been about court and my ego. My role was to get all the available evidence and put it in front of a jury and let them decide. And it finishes there. If it's proven, it's proven. If it's not, it's not. That's a matter for a jury. Where I was so caught up on, I have to prove this, and I think it was more around my own ego and my own want to be, the superstar detective, rather than what was actually my job and what was best for the people involved in that.
That's a very deep insight, Tim, which requires multiple levels of honesty, and some would never quite get there. But goodness me, 130 witnesses, everything else. It's damn near impossible not to get invested, and you've got so much skin in the game. But as you rightly say, it's that roller coaster ride. And would your drinking ebb and flow depending on, I guess you're drinking to celebrate, but you're also drinking to make up for a loss. So I suppose it evens itself out through the process.
Yeah, and I think that I used to really struggle in court when people were giving evidence that I'd taken statements from or helped along the way. You'd worry so much that you'd miss something, or you hadn't got some piece of information, or that in cross-examination it was going to be tripped up and it was going to be my fault and so on. So I used to get really anxious and stressed about what was going to happen, and my only way to recover from that was get straight to the pub after work to make that go away. It was I found the trials really difficult from that aspect.
It's all consuming, mate, isn't it? Yeah, you've spoken very openly about that lack of sleep, getting by on 3 or 4 hours a night. Putting your head on the pillow, with all that going through your mind, that's not conducive with restful sleep either, is it?
No, and I think that there was also that bit of culture. Like, that wouldn't have been the only job I was doing either. Like, we would have been in other investigations and in and out, doing all sorts of things. So it was, it wasn't as if you finished something like that and then took a little bit of time off, which I'm not saying you wouldn't have been allowed to, but that wasn't our culture. Like, if I had said I needed 3 months off because I'm burnt out, I'm sure that management would have said, go for your life. But we didn't do that. That was seen as a weak way out. So really that just pushing on and keeping going, and I'll get to the next side of leave and then I'll be okay, or I'll get to the weekend and then I'll be okay. For me, it was, I just want to get through today to make sure I'm okay. That's where it got to, just all my energy to get through a single day, let alone to the end of a week.
And like you say, Tim, that that case involving Elisabeth Membrey, that's one of, we could sit here for a week talking about cases where you put as much of your effort and everything into it, and some you win, some you lose. But that's a watershed case for you, I guess, perhaps quite simply linked to that photo with Joy and Roger, her parents, outside court. That to me is what takes you back to that place. Take the photo. The photo's not there. It's not quite as impactful as perhaps what it is.
No, it's probably only recently I saw the photo and really started to think more deeply about it. And the thing that struck me there was no winners from that. It was just nobody won, despite all the effort and good intention. It's just a horrible circumstance. It was really out of everyone's control. What happened. We investigated as best we could. We didn't get the result we wanted, but I don't think there's any more we could have done from an investigative perspective to change that result.
Tim, this case, the Elisabeth Membrey case, goes back to 1994. Your involvement as a cold case, 2006-2007. The photograph that you've spoken about with such insight, taken on the outside the court with Mum and Dad, Joy and Roger, March 2011. He was ultimately acquitted of those charges, the individual that you took to court. My understanding is, Tim, that there's been some more recent further developments with this case.
Yeah, obviously I'm no longer a member of Victoria Police or the Homicide Squad. I was contacted and know that there was another suspect with some DNA evidence that had been located. They were investigating. I must say, when I first heard, I was surprised, but it's just a cycle, isn't it, that a new set of eyes has picked it up, they're investigating it, and will be going through the same process as I did, as trying to collect the best evidence you possibly can to try and bring that case to resolution. Now, it's not a matter of who's right or who's wrong. It's where the evidence takes us. And unfortunately, Roger, Elisabeth's dad, passed away earlier in the year, which was very unfortunate. And yeah, as I said, Joy is a wonderful advocate for, to keep that case going, and they were front and centre around keeping those investigations going into the death of their daughter. With such determination and grace, it was a really remarkable achievement by the pair of them.
Tim, you're in the job 21 years, and again, I don't know the reasons behind it, but when you left the job 2015, what was your reasons behind leaving?
Yeah, it's a bit complex. So 2nd of October 2014, I'd just been through a period of rapid promotion. I was a Detective Senior Constable in 2009, and by 2013 I was a Detective Senior Sergeant at the Human Source Management Unit. So I'd gone in pretty much after the Nicola Gobbo matter blew up, and they removed all the source development team or the players who were looking after that unit, and I went in with a new team to take on the remainder of the high-risk sources. And to be honest, I was unwell then, and to put the mask on and get through every day was really hard work. But as the story goes, you put your hand up for promotion and they promote you, so I was keen to do the work. 2nd of October 2014, I'd reached a point where I couldn't manage anymore with either the work, the damage I was doing to myself, the damage I was doing to my family, the risks I was taking in an operational and personal sense. I'd been trying to get off the drink for a long time and couldn't, and it formed the view that suicide was the best way out for me. And I crashed a covert police car into a parked car in a suburb down here called Fairfield at 3 o'clock in the morning while I was heavily intoxicated. Fortunately, I didn't hurt anyone, which would have really been tragic for them, but for me as well. I was very fortunate nothing occurred and didn't hurt myself. After the accident, I was trapped in the car, and I remember thinking if I could have got out, I would have done a runner, but I couldn't physically get out. Some police turned up. I knew if I refused a breath test, they couldn't arrest me. And so I refused a breath test, told them I was going to kill myself, and walked off, and got a taxi into town, sent some text messages to my bosses and family and said, that was it, I'm done, you won't find me. And I got on a train to a place called Warrnambool, which is a major country town here, for no other reason other than there was a train going to Warrnambool at that time of the morning. And I had a really clear plan about what I was going to do. And I been thinking about it for some months. It had been a really difficult period for the family and for me, as those symptoms had become nearly unbearable, as far as no sleep and panic attacks and anxiety and these continuous thoughts around death, and suicide actually became a thinking about suicide became a safe place, if that makes any sense. But having some, at least some hope that there could be an end to it all, rather than continuing to live as I was, actually was a comfort. That's the point I got to. So in my pure investigative brain, it was just another investigation to do, another operation to go out and complete. I got down to Warrnambool, and fortunately or unfortunately, being the good alcoholic that I was, I needed another beer at 9:30 in the morning or something it was. I went to a pub and I decided we just started recording conversations on our mobile phones with, if we met informers and so on, and I decided I was going to leave a suicide note on the mobile phone to see if the investigators were smart enough to find it. And I plugged the phone in at the pub to make sure it had power, and the coppers were there within about 10 minutes. They'd been trying to track me all night and in the morning, and as soon as the phone had power, obviously they could trace it, and they come and grab me. So it was a very, very difficult time. I'd love to say that was the worst part, and then from then it was onwards and upwards and back to a full recovery, but it was a really difficult period, and trying to get well again took a lot of practice and patience and determination in some ways.
It's a hell of a story, Tim. That accident, driving that unmarked police car into a parked car, was that subconsciously? Was that an attempt to take your life, do you think, or was it just purely an accident?
It's the one I can't put an answer to. That was what I'd thought of as the way of completing suicide, mainly because it would just be the hard-working detective who stacked his car after doing too many hours or whatever, and I could keep some dignity for the family and the workplace wouldn't be embarrassed and so on. It made no sense because clearly I would have been over and it would have all come out anyway. But in my mind, that was a way to do it. I don't specifically recall deciding right that moment to do it, probably because I was too intoxicated, but I knew my level of suicidality was through the roof when I drank. So it was always a risk that something was going to happen when I was on the drink, and that was pretty regularly around that time, because the other part if you think about it, from my point of view, if I wanted it to be an accident, I had to make it as natural, the lead up to it as natural as possible, that I hadn't spoken to anyone about it, that no one would see the clues, and it was just an accident. I think, I'm not 100% sure in hindsight, but certainly once it happened, I had real clarity about what the rest of the operation was and what I needed to do.
So you're sitting in that pub at Warrnambool. You're going to put a suicide note on your phone, but you had to charge it up, which, goodness me, so many sliding door moments through all of that, aren't there, Tim? But you decided in your mind that was it for you, and that you were going to be better to finish things.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Goodness me. You're married at that point, still possibly with younger children and things such as that, Tim?
Yep, married with 3 kids.
Mm. But where your head was at the time, you would feel that yourself and for your family and the way that you had been, that was the best option for all concerned, yeah?
Yeah, it's an interesting point that in my mind at that time, and if you had been in that taxi or on the train, you would have struggled to argue against me, I think. I was so clear about why it was the best way out and that it would stop suffering for so many others, mainly my family. It wasn't until I hooked up with the psychologist the next day, and I went through that plan with him and told him what my intentions were and why I wanted to do that. First time I'd opened up to him about that. And he come back with a quote that stuck with me. He said, that's a very compelling argument, Tim. You've given me a lot of reasons as to why you think it would be the best thing for you and your family, but you don't get to choose how other people feel. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, before you do anything, you've made a decision that your wife will be better off and your kids will be better off. How about you go and ask them what they think and then come back and we'll have another talk. He knew what the answer would be. He wasn't that naive. And it just shifted something for me a little bit. It got me thinking a little bit differently. It wasn't like a moment where I didn't think about suicide again, but certainly in that moment, it shifted my thinking that, he was right. I don't get to choose how they feel. I'm making decisions that aren't mine to make.
Yeah, I've been married 27 years, mate. That's a tough old talk to have with your wife too, I would imagine.
Oh, look, the home life was really difficult, and it was a challenging period. But of all the factors that have allowed me to come through and then get back to work and do the work I do now, I'd say the support of my wife and kids has clearly been the most important factor in all of that. They've been through a lot, but also given such joy and pleasure to me along the way, and support that hopefully now we're getting some of those rewards back.
Tim, you labelled yourself, and goodness me, your candour, your honesty is quite confronting, Tim. You spoke about your alcoholic self. At what point did you concede to yourself that you were in fact an alcoholic, and that was perhaps a contributing factor to the situations or scenarios that you were finding yourself in?
Oh, look, I think I'd been trying to get off the drink for probably 2 years. I was seeing an alcohol counsellor trying to get off the drink. I remember they had me on tablets to, I think it was meant to make you feel sick if you drank or something, and I just convinced myself they were placebo and kept drinking and taking them, so it looked like I was, but it didn't slow me down too much. I found it really difficult to get off alcohol, and it was one of the real challenges that I had, that I couldn't understand in my mind how I went from a articulate, high-achieving, well-respected detective in the Victoria Police to an anxious, suicidal alcoholic. Like, how the hell does that happen? And the alcohol thing was it was like an escape for me from the torment. And the only way I could get any sleep was to get pissed and go to sleep. And I'd sleep for 3 or 4 hours until generally it was my body craving alcohol that'd wake me up. And I'd get up and go to the gym or do whatever. And I learnt another great lesson, that if you sit at the gym and look at the weights, you don't get fit, apparently. So, but as you would know in policing, there's always another job to do. There's always another investigation to go to. You can always go to work and lose yourself there. So I didn't drink during the day or whilst I was on duty or anything like that, but I drank heavily outside of hours, and generally so other people wouldn't know. So it was all hidden, particularly in the last couple of years. Others knew I drank, but not to the extent that I was drinking.
Mm. So you're pretty high-functioning alcoholic, to be fair, and as you say, you were still maintaining, you working as a high-ranking police officer or detective through that whole period. Yeah.
One of the comments most after it was that nobody saw it coming, that I was still functioning at a high level. I was making good decisions. I was fronting up every day, and it's an interesting sort of sideline if we talk about resilience. And I had this conversation at the police academy last week with some detectives around. Resilience is a strange word in that. What does resilience mean, and what does it look like? Because some of the people I was talking to were actually working with me at that time in 2014. And they said, once we gave a description of what a resilient person looked like, they said that was you. You were there every day, you fronted up, you were able to bounce back, you could make good decisions, you were confident, you were easy to get along with, all those things. Yet for me to be resilient, I had to be an alcoholic. I had suicidal thoughts. I was really anxious. I was hiding a whole lot of stuff. So if I wasn't willing to put my hand up and understand why I was doing that, what chance did a manager or a senior manager have of pulling me up and saying, oh, we think you're struggling a bit, when I went to such extraordinary lengths just to keep that facade on in the workplace?
It's, I guess, to simple. Well, not trying to simplify. You're living a lie, mate, I guess, aren't you, to be fair? Absolutely. Yeah.
That conflict with your values around who you want to be and who you actually are. You're living two lives, and it was really draining. And one of the, again, speaking about my psyche, used to ask me what the 4 most important things in my life were, and I'd reel off, my wife, my kids, my physical health, my mental health. And he'd say, how many decisions do you make every day where they come first? And I'd say 0, because they never come first back then. Work was first, second, third, fourth, fifth. That's all I thought about. So not only was I living a lie in that I was fronting up with all those symptoms that I was hiding, I wasn't actually being true to myself and who I wanted to be as a good dad and a good parent and a good husband and brother and son and so on. So certainly wasn't the best version of myself internally. And I think that was part of the conflict, that on top of all the challenges I had around my mental health and traumatic events and, all the other stuff that goes with policing, I wasn't happy with myself as a person either.
Is it, and again, I'm asking because I'm genuinely interested, Tim, is it the alcohol that causing the mental health? Is it the mental health linked to the alcohol, the drinking? Is it all one and the same? How do you see that? How do you separate it, or is it inseparable?
Yeah, it's a challenge because, look, I grew up in country Victoria. I played a lot of sport. We drank, big family, country town. So drinking was always around. as my mental health deteriorated, my drinking increased. Now, chicken or the egg, I don't know, but they certainly didn't help each other. I know that drinking didn't help the mental health condition, and the mental health condition didn't stop the drinking. So, I got to a really challenging place where I just couldn't understand what was going on with my brain. There was things that I was thinking that, there was a period I went through where I believed there was a black object living inside of me that was, used to grow and become more agitated the more I thought about work or thought about particular incidents. And I now know, after the study I've done and the work I've done, that clearly I was experiencing reactions to PTSD and trauma and a whole lot of things. But my only way of coping was to drink to make that go away. Mm. So it became just a tool for me to function.
Mm. You seem to be able to talk about this, Tim, with such clarity and such honesty now. I'm interested, the Tim Peck of 2024, if you could go back, sit down, what would you tell him, mate? What would your advice be?
Two parts to that. The first one is, one of the reasons I sort of have such good recollection is that when I went off in 2014, the day after, my clinician asked me to start writing a journal. And I wrote every day for 15 months until I got back into got a job again. And I didn't read that for about 5 years. It just sat there. I never thought I'd ever read it again. And when I did, it was really confronting about what I'd written, about how I felt, and the ups and downs and the anger and the depression and the suicidality that lingered for probably 6 or 8 months. I thought it was all over in 2 weeks, but it lingered for a long time as a get-out clause. So I think that's given me a really good way of going back and reliving that. Memory's such a fallible thing, and to have a record of how I went through that period. But really, for me now, it's about the little things you do every day. Like, policing's a great job, don't get me wrong. There's great rewards that come with policing, and I love my time. And I'd still say that some of the greatest feelings you get from, if you win a Supreme Court trial for a murder and that no one expected you to win, and that there's you and the family and your investigative team, and it's just a fantastic feeling to get that sort of result. But with that comes significant risk. Like, if you think about, if you're going to do a murder investigation, you're going to see a dead body. You're going to be dealing with families who are grieving the loss of a loved one. You're going to be dealing with someone who's committed a murder. So it's going to be challenging. There's going to be a court case. There's going to be all sorts of things. So we sign up for it. We know it's a difficult job. We mitigate risk in every other aspect of our life, around physical risk to the investigation, compromise, all that sort of thing. We really don't pay much attention to our mental health and how we're going to manage with that personally. And sort of over the years, I've reflected back, and in the end, it was the little things. If I stuck to the little things every day, simple things like exercise and sleep and diet and managing my alcohol intake, looking after my personal relationships, having that balance between work and home life, making good decisions around my values, that's when I functioned at my best. Now, it wouldn't have meant that I may not have been impacted by a mental health condition, but I'm certain it wouldn't have been as bad, and the symptoms wouldn't have got so far down the track that I thought I needed to end my life to get away from it. So going back to 2004, if I could, I think I'd really emphasise the need to accept the risk that's there, be open and more visible about your health and your mental health, and share that with others, and have a really clear plan about what you would do if you were impacted. Who are you going to reach out to? Do you have a psychologist? Do you have a GP? Whatever the case may be. But we gave that no thought. The only thought I had was, how can I make this go away? And that was to drink.
Folks that'll be listening to this, Tim, we get a lot of ex-police, current police, ex-services, but also we get a lot of their family members, listening in, and they could be wives, they could be kids who may be a little bit older, but maybe looking at a mum or a dad that had been in the job or could still be in the job at a fairly senior level. Any advice for them if they've got perhaps a Tim Peck as you were within that family environment?
Yeah, look, it's a difficult one to answer, because in my experience, it got to the point the only one who was going to change anything for the better was me. I needed to make a decision to get well. And until that happened, life at home was always going to be difficult. Having said that, the support that they provided and that non-judgmental, particularly when it became really clear that I had a significant mental health injury, and building trust again is so difficult, because I haven't had a drink since that accident in 14. But to them, I could go a year and say I haven't had a drink and they'd still worry that I'd have another drink, if you know what I mean. Building trust is it's just repetitive over and over again. It can be really frustrating why won't they believe me? Well, have a look back at your history, mate, and there's a good reason why they shouldn't. So it is those little steps and those conversations that you can have that we don't. So it's okay to speak to mum and dad and ask them how they're going. They might say, I'm fine and everything's good, but I'll just about guarantee you later on at some stage, either that day or that night or in the next week, they'll say, someone's noticed. I need to do something about this if people are noticing and it's impacting. So you might never find out that conversation was the catalyst, but if you don't have the conversation, nothing will change. So as confronting as it might be, have a crack.
I want to ask, but you don't have to answer, but just where the conversation has gone to, could I ask, did your marriage survive 2014 and onwards?
Happy to say, yes, still happily married with 3 kids. It happened at a time when I look at it as I was really fortunate that my eldest was just starting VCE, and I was actually suspended from duty with pay for 12 months whilst they sorted out what they were going to do with me. So I got to spend every day of his VCE year with him at home and grew that relationship again, spending time with the girls, my 2 daughters at home, and rebuilding that trust with the wife and the family. So, a remarkable achievement for that group to be able to tolerate what they did and watch me go through that and then watch me come through the other side. It's it's challenging, and it's certainly changed our mindset towards mental health collectively. I'm sure they're sick of me and my little diagrams and my latest theory about mental health, but I was fortunate I was able to, you can't get that time back, but at least repair some relationships that were really significantly challenged by my behaviours and not accepting myself that there was a mental health issue.
After leaving the job, 2015, 21 years service, you moved out. You've no doubt been involved in different environments during that time. Over the last 3 years or so, you've devoted yourself to a program, Responder Assist. Just wondering if you can just share a little bit of that with us, please.
Yeah, so Responder Assist is a program run by Phoenix Australia, who are the Centre of Post-Traumatic Health in Australia, based at Melbourne University in Carlton. It covers the 7 emergency service agencies in Victoria. We have a clinical arm, so an intake and clinic service for both current and former members can access. We also do research and have a very strong focus on training clinicians around the cultural awareness they need to effectively treat emergency service workers. That was a culmination of a period of work where, after leaving Victoria Police, I landed a job at Beyond Blue as the National Engagement Manager for their Police and Emergency Services program. So I was heavily involved in a very big study called Answering the Call, which really gave me insight across Australia as to where we're at as far as mental health. I'd studied and done a master's in counselling and psychotherapy in that period. And then I spent 4.5 years at the Police Association as the Manager of Wellbeing Services. So got to deal with hundreds of members going through the same or different levels of where I was at, and supporting them through their journey and hopefully a pathway to recovery or transition out and so on. One of the real needs was to find a place where members could access independent and confidentially to get access to evidence-based treatments, where we could collect some data and understand why people were coming forward, and really provide that service where, when they reached out, that the people they were speaking to understood their world. And that's what we've really tried to create, firstly at Blue Hub through the Police Association, which I started when I was there, and now with Responder Assist, where there's a real focus that if a member puts their hand up and comes forward, that the clinician they're speaking to has a really strong understanding and knowledge of the culture, the language, and the difficulties of emergency service work to hopefully get better outcomes. And as I mentioned, we do quite a bit of research around who's coming in, what the outcomes are, and trying to understand better which treatments work best for who. So it's a very rewarding role. It involves me working across the 7 agencies, often with former or current members. But Phoenix Australia is basically, it does have great academics, great researchers, great clinicians, but my role really is to bring that lived experience and that knowledge of the industry to try and shift some of the thinking to make sure that the treatment we're providing is actually accessible and understandable to the members that are going to be using it. So it's like I guess a bit of a conduit in between the clinical world and the operational world that I used to survive in.
Tim, not only are you devoting yourself to helping others based on some of the experiences that you had, good, bad and indifferent during your time in the police, I understand you've recently penned a book, been published. That's no mean feat, getting a book published. The book is called Invisible Obvious. Tim, I'd just like to, if you could, just give us a little bit of an overview, because I'm sure many folks listening in would be interested in having a read.
Yeah, it was a bit of a labour of love. It's taken me just about 10 years since that accident back in 2014, and I didn't pick up the writing until about 5 years ago. And I mentioned earlier about the journal that I kept, and that forms part of the book, trying to describe and articulate my recovery from that deep, dark place I was in. So I detail my career in policing. I don't talk about any cases I was involved in. I don't talk about members I worked with. It's really a personal view of how I managed in the police force, and then after I hit crisis, what I did to try and get well again, and then some of the strategies I use now to try and remain well, understanding that there are no guarantees. I've got to keep working at it, and some days are better than others, but I know that if I stick to a solid plan and have those good supports around me, that most days are better.
Tim, I just want to thank you so very much for taking the time to come into the studio in Melbourne, have a chat to us. Tim, I've done a lot of these interviews, but I'd be struggling to think of one where anyone has been more open and honest and, in fact, more insightful into the journey that they went through. Your story it's a hell of a story. Tim, I want to thank you for your service, your 21 years service to the good people of Victoria, but perhaps even more so, the courage that it's taken you to go back into these roles, to sit down, to pen that book, so that others can perhaps benefit and not have to go down that terrible road that you went down. So thanks so much for your honesty. It's been an absolute pleasure to have a chat to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Crime Insiders Detectives is a LiSTNR original production. It's hosted by me, Brent Sanders, produced by Ed Gooden, and sound designed and imaged by Link Kelly.